Today's daf, we're going to be learning a Shvuot daf Lamed Daled. Okay, this is a study guide for today. It will be very useful. What we're going to do today is basically the structure of the daf is super simple. It's the content that's going to be a little more complicated, but more so even toward the end. Um, what we learned yesterday is that Shvuat Heidut, when you take this oath about testimony, it's only for Dine Mamano, only for monetary law. Where do we get that from? We saw four reasons, okay? Four Tanaic opinions. I'm going to share the study guide for a minute and you will see. There's four opinions. We'll go over them very briefly. Okay, we have Rabbi Eliezer who said, oh, because of the owing. We have O's by Pikadon. Pikadon is obviously only Mamonot. It's some sort of Pikadon you have of mine, you deny that you have it, or some sort of thing you stole and you deny you have it. Okay, all sorts of monetary things. And there it says, or this, or that. And by us, it also says, or this, or that. So just like there, it's Mammon, also here it's Mammon. Now, as after class, this isn't exactly Gzeira Shava. Okay, it's a little different because the Gzeira Shava we're going to have is in the fourth opinion at the end of Divrei Rabbi Shimon. We have Techta Techta. That's the Gzeira Shava. It's just that there's a similar usage of words, and we're going to say, that teaches you that we're going to compare these two. And we have the whole thing. What about the sota? What about murder, where it also has O? And then we said, well, they're not exactly the same. Then we have Rabbi Akiva. In the Psukim, after Shvuat Eidut, it says, Vayaki Yasham Lechat Me'ela. Mem is always limiting. So how is it limiting? Well, it must be limiting to mammon and not something else. Okay? Only to money. That's the second. Third, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who aid Ora'au Yada. That's going to be, well, because it says either saw or knew, it's going to have to be a dude that could be either you saw but didn't understand, or you understood without seeing, and like circumstantial evidence. And we're going to talk about this later, so I'm not going to review exactly the cases of what all that means. We'll review as we get to it. Then we have Rabbi Shimon. So we're going to start with Rabbi Shimon again. Today, Rabbi Shimon breaks down into, I split it into, he basically has two claims. Yeah, maybe I should have organized it a little differently, but it's really four sections, okay? First, he's going to say, okay, let's read it now. Chayev kam v'chayev b'pikadon, ma lahalan ino b'daber ela b'tfiat mamon, av kan ino b'daber ela b'tfiat mamon. The first thing, he just runs a general comparison. It's just like Pikadon. We're going to learn it from Pikadon, basically. Now that it's just like, we're going to learn from Pikadon. Just like Pikadon is only Mammon. Okay, it sounds a lot like Rabbi Akiva. No, Rabbi Eliezer, who said we're going to learn it from, right, Pikadon, from the Owen. He doesn't use the Owen. He just says, well, just like in Pikadon also here. And he says all the more so, it's a Kavachor from Pikadon. Because Pikadon, okay, מה פיקדון שעשה בו נשים כנשים, קרובים כרחוקים, פסולים ככשרים, וחייב כל אחד ואחד מפני בית דין ושלא בפני בית דין. It's much more wide-reaching, because anyone can be liable to Shvuat a Pikadon if they lie under oath about a Pikadon. And yet, it's limited in Omedaber Ela B'Tfiat Mamon. So, if we take Shvuat Eidut, we compare Eidut, which is much more limited in scope. It's only kosher witnesses. You're only liable if you do it in the court. So it's already limited. So the case which is far-reaching is also limited to Mammon. Well, obviously the case which is much more limited is going to be limited also. Must be also limited to monetary. However, then he breaks the Kavachomer. Okay, and this is why I should have broken it here. Breaks the Kavachomer, says, oh, that's not true. And in the end, learns it from a Gzeira Shava. That should have been a separate section. Okay, so here's the break of the Kavachomer. And this is the line that's really going to bother us later, or we're going to deal with a lot at the end of today's daf. Says, wait a minute, but there really is no Pikadon, because what was there really is no Kavachomer. What was the theory of the Kavachomer? The Pikadon is much more broad, because it applies to many more cases than Eidut applies to, and yet limited to Mammon, and therefore Eidut must be limited to Mammon as well. But remember, Pikadon, deposit, oath of deposit. Eidut, oath of testimony. Mala Pikadon, sheken lo asab, mushbak kinishbang, kishogeg. But wait, Pikadon is limited. Why is that? Right? We said, oh, it applies to everybody, but you know what? It might apply to everybody, but it doesn't apply to a case of a mushba kinishba, meaning, okay, what's the case of Pikadon? We learned the simple reading of Pikadon is, I just get up and take the oath myself, not that you maybe take the oath. And it says here, la saba mushba kinishba. The one, if I took the oath of deposit because someone said to me, do you swear, let's say it was your item, you said, do you swear to me that you don't have my item? And I say, yes, I'm not liable. Now, this is a little bit tricky because we learned you are liable. Remember, we learned this back and forth that you learn from Edut to Pikadon and Pikadon to Edut. Remember, Edut is only Mushma Mipi Acherin, right? Someone else told you to take the oath. And Pikadon is you did it on your own. And then we learned that we're going to learn from one to the other and one to the other to the other that both apply in both cases. So that's already one bit of a problem with Rabbi Shimon. And the second thing is also a bit of a problem. Mezik Kishogeg. In Pikadon, you're not chayav on mezid. You're only chayav in shkaga, which we never heard before either. So we're going to talk about that later. You would have thought pikadon is I have your item and I deny having it, and I would have thought it was mezid, intentional. Well, Rabbi Shimon says it's not. Okay, so we're going to have to deal with this whole line, and that's why I underlined it. It's a bit of a problematic line. The first thing the Gemara is going to say about this, just to let you know, is mechaku ala b'ma'arav. You could see it here. They laughed at his whole thing in Eretz Yisrael, and we're going to have to figure out why. We're actually going to have a lot of trouble figuring out why they laughed at it. Okay, but anyway, so Pikadon doesn't have Mushba Kanishba, doesn't have Mezik Kishogeg, which we really don't understand yet. And yet, Tomar Be'edut, right? You can't say from there we're going to learn to Edut because Edut applies in many more cases. Asaba Mushba Kanishba, right? If someone else made you swear, you're liable just like if you swore on your own. And Mizi Kishogeg, you're liable also if you did it intentionally. If you lied under oath intentionally that you don't know any testimony, you're liable also. And you're also liable for shogeg. So actually, the Kal Vachomer doesn't work. And therefore, it comes and says, Talmud Lomar, from here we can learn, Techta l'gzera shava. Where in the end are we going to learn it from? And that really maybe comes to explain why he said in the beginning that we're going to learn from Pikadon to Edut. Because of the techta, they both start with the words nefesh ki techta l'gzera shava. Nemar kan techta, nemar lalan techta. They both say if you sinned, ma lalan ino medaber el tfiat mamon, av kan ino medaber el tfiat mamon. So Rabbi Shimon says, in the end, okay, he tried to say it's from a Kal Vachomer, rejected the Kal Vachomer, went with the Gzera Shava instead. Okay, now the Gemara is going to go one by one into all these opinions. Okay, Mat Kifla Rabba Bar Ula. So now we're going to go back to the first one, Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, and basically we're going to have a slew of difficulties, okay, on what Rabbi Eliezer says. And then we're going to have some difficulties on what Rabbi Akiva, one difficulty really on what Rabbi Akiva said, and then a question that comes based on that. Then we're going to have a difficulty on Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Then we're going to go off on a bit of a tangent, something you can infer from there and go off on that. And then we're going to start with why or all the reasons that Rabbi Shimon, what are possible reasons? If you look at the chart on page 2, what's the reason why they laughed at him in Eretz Yisrael and they thought his opinion was ridiculous? And then each time we have a suggestion, we're going to reject it. Okay, that's the structure of today's daf. If you want, you can follow along the study guide. I might share here and there, but overall, I'm not going to share it as much today. Okay. Matkifla Rabba Bar Ula. So we're going to start with Rabbi Eliezer and start with difficulties. Bitoy yochichu. Shehem Oin, v'yesh imahem shvua, ve'en imahem kohen, u'medabrim shelo b'tfiat mamon. Okay, your whole theory was, well, it says by Pikadon. It says by Edut. Let's learn one from the other. What about Sota? What about murderer? Well, murderer has to be an oath. And Sota, while there's an oath, it's an oath taken by the Kohen and not, right? The Kohen kind of is involved. So, right, it's really about the woman, but the Kohen says it and the woman answers, Amen. So this has oath and no Kohen. That's what, and it has the word O. But wait a minute. What happened to Shvuat Bitoy? Remember, lahara lehetiv, you say something to do good or to do bad or to do good, to yes do something, to not do something. And it says the word O. Where does it say the word O? Lahara o lehetiv. Also has an O there. Now, Shvuat Bitoy is not just for mamonot. It's for anything. It has nothing to do with money. It could have to do with anything. So why don't we take that as our example? Meaning that will disprove Rabbi Eliezer if you're going to learn it from Oin, which are Yeshem Shvuah, they have an oath, Einimam Kohen, there's no Kohen involved in the story. And here you say though, but wait, Umidabrim Shalo B'Tfiat Mamon. This one is not Mamon. So how can you learn it from there? So they say, so now we have a question because theoretically, if you learn from the O of Pikadon, you're going to say only Mamon. You could also learn it from the O of Bitoy. So why prefer one to the other? We're going to have a lot of this today. Why not learn something from somewhere else? And then we're going to try to say, well, it's more similar to this because of that. It's more similar to that because of that. Well, it's more logical to learn from Pikadon. Why? Because remember, this goes back to the Gzera Shava that Rabbi Shimon mentions, which is, it says, Nefesh ki tachta, right? Edut starts off the same way the Pikadon starts off. That was the whole sugya we had where we make the Gzera Shava between them. So they say, Adrabah, what do you mean? More likely, if you had to choose, now I want you to remember the chapter. Chapter starts Vayikra Perek Hey with all the Korban Olev Yoreds. And what's mentioned there? Edut and Bitui. And where does Pikadon come up? Later in the chapter. And what's the Korban for Pikadon? Korban Asham. It's not a Chataru Levi Yored. So it doesn't make so much sense to learn it from Pikadon. Yes, it's true, they both say the word Techta, but Adrabah, mi Bitui Havalei Lamela, Sheken Chatat mi Chatat. Both Shvuat Bitoy and Shvuat Edut, right? Again, the oath of expression and the oath of testimony, denying that I know any testimony, both you bring a sin offering, as opposed to Pikadon, you bring a guilt offering. It's a different korban. So wouldn't you think to learn one from that one, which again would mean Edut is even in non-monetary cases. No. If we're going to start making comparisons, even though you're right, it's a different korban, it's actually Edut is much more similar to Pikadon in the following ways. Sheken, chata b'mezid, tave b'kafre v'avre. Okay, let's go over each one. Chata, first of all, it's a sin. Okay, both are talking about sins, nefesh ki tachta. They're both for acts that were done intentionally. Now remember, Rabbi Shimon said it's not, right? Pikadon is only shogeg, but putting aside Rabbi Shimon's opinion, because we're not in Rabbi Shimon right now, both are if you did something intentionally. Let's go to Shvuat Bitoy. Shvuat Bitoy, first of all, there's no sin. It doesn't say sin in the pasuk. You actually did something wrong because you didn't keep your word, but it doesn't say sin in the pasuk. It's only if you forgot that you took the oath that you're liable to bring the sacrifice. Tave v'kafre. In Pikadon and Edut, both cases, somebody says, you have to testify for me. You have my object, right? There's a tfi'ah, there's a claim. And then there's a denial. The person who swore said, I swear I don't know any testimony for you. I swear I didn't take your object. And they lied, obviously. Ve'avre, and both are oaths that they take about an action that happened in the past, as opposed to Shvuat Bitoy, which even if you take the opinion that Shnayin Shein Arba, but still Shvuat Bitoy is written in the Torah about something you say about the future. So therefore, it seems like Shvuat Edut is much more similar to Shvuat HaPikadon, which would then get us to what we said before, which is since Shvuat HaPikadon is only in Mamonot, it's only monetary things, Shvuat Edut is also monetary things. But the Gemara says, no, no, no. You want to play the comparison game? Let's show how similar Shvuat Edut is to Shvuat Bitoy, which would then say not only Mamon, Adrama, Bitoy Havalei Lamela, Sheken Chatat Sheyarda Lechomesh. This is like a mnemonic because it's making it into a sentence, but it's really saying three things. It's a sin offering as opposed to a guilt offering. This we said before, right? Bitoy and Edut are in the beginning section where it's all talking about the Korban Olav Yoreh, which is a sin offering. And the korban that you bring, if you did a shvuat pikadon and lied under oath, you bring actually a guilt offering, an asham. Sheyarda, what's sheyarda? Olav yored. You can go down in level in the korban for the bitoy and for the edut. Both of them, you can go down if you're not wealthy. For the korban asham, you have to bring an animal, and there's no two ways about it. You can't say I'm poor, I can't bring that animal. And lechomesh. In pikadon, there's a fifth added payment. If I steal your object and I claim, right, you give it to me to watch, and then I claim it's mine, and I swear I lie under oath, I not only have to return you your object in the end when it turns out I lied, I also have to add an additional fifth payment. Now that doesn't exist, not by Bitoy, not by Edut. So therefore, this is actually funny because it's not lechomesh, it's ein chomesh. They don't have chomesh, the other one does. So we see these are similar. It's more similar actually to Bitoy, to which the Gemara says, no, final answer here, Hanach Nefishan. Why are we learning this from Pikadon in the end? Because if we take the list of similarities, Shvuat Edut to Shvuat Pikadon, as opposed to Shvuat Edut to Shvuat Bitoy, there's much more ways, right? If we count the ways, there's 5 things that are similar. Chata b'mezid, no, 4. Chata b'mezid, tave b'kafre, right? Tave b'kafre is really, I think you call that 1. There's a claim and a denial of the claim. And in the past, that's 4. And there's only 3 in the comparison to Bitoy, Chata, Sheyarda, Lechomesh. So in the end, we go by what's more. It's more similar to Pikadon. It's similar to Pikadon in more ways, and therefore we learn it from Pikadon. So we're done with our difficulties on Rabbi Eliezer. We can learn O from Pikadon and not O Mibitoy, because in the end, it's got more similarities to Pikadon. What we're showing here is it's not just the word O. It's just similar to Pikadon. Okay, it's the combination. Now we're moving to the second. Rabbi Akiva Omer. And the Gemara is nice, they repeat it also, in case you forget. Remember, me'ele is limiting the men from those. So you're not going to be liable in all cases of those, but limited. How are we going to limit it? To money, remember? There are some cases of shvuat edu where you'll be liable. There's some cases where you won't be. What are they going to be? If it was money, you'll be liable. If it wasn't having to do with money, you won't be liable. Okay, if somebody wanted you to testify about the status of a married woman or something, and you lied and you said, I won't testify, I don't know anything about it. Well, it's not a monetary claim, so you'll be exempt. Now they say, Ipochana, why don't you say the reverse? If it's limiting, why don't you say it limits it to all cases that are not monetary cases? And monetary cases are out. And where'd you get to this? Right? And as if you don't accept the OO or something like that we just said, and the whole comparison that Rabbi Eliezer made, then where would you get to Mammon? All Rabbi Akiva says is it's limited to something. You could come up with a million ways that we're going to limit it in this way, not that way. So in the end, they say, well, it must be Rabbi Akiva agrees with Rabbi Eliezer about the Owen. Rabbi Akiva, Owen to Rabbi Eliezer Samach. In other words, he had the mem. It must limit it. How does it limit it? Oh, well, because we have, not no pun intended, but since we have the O's, we'll learn it from the O's. Okay? And we'll compare it to Pikadon, and that's the limitation. Just like Pikadon's only monetary, this is also monetary. Well, if that's the case, then what's the real difference between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer? My benai, ben Rabbi Eliezer, ben Rabbi Akiva, they're basically saying the same thing. They're both saying, let's learn it from the O's. The only difference is that Rabbi Akiva has this may. There's only some cases, not all cases. And then we're going to see that it must be there's some case within Mammon that Rabbi Akiva limits it and Rabbi Eliezer doesn't. And we're going to have two possible answers. Ika benayu mashbia ede karka. What if it has to do with a claim on land? Okay, we've seen this many times where perhaps there's distinctions between land and movables, right? The case of Pikadon is a movable case, right? It's talking about a Pikadon, an object that's in your hands. So the question is, does it include land as well? And then will we apply the same thing to Edut? So, mashbia ede karka, the Rabbi Eliezer chayavim, the Rabbi Akiva pturim. We're going to say if it's land, maybe that's where Rabbi Akiva limits it more than Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer will say that still counts for shvuat edut because it's monetary. All monetary is in. And Rabbi Akiva is going to say no, monetary is not in. Not all monetary. We're going to limit it not to land. Ula Rabbi Yochanan Damar Hatam, Rabbi Yochanan, who said somewhere else, Mashbia Idekar Kafilu Rabbi Eliezer Ptulim. He thinks that even Rabbi Eliezer doesn't include land. And then we can't say that's the difference between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer, that Rabbi Akiva is more limiting because even Rabbi Eliezer doesn't include land. So how are you going to explain that? Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiva. According to Rabbi Yochanan, how are you going to explain it? Remember we had a question about Edek Knas. Are you exempt or not? We didn't actually have an answer. So we'll say perhaps that's the difference. Rabbi Eliezer will say it's more inclusive of more things, and Edek Knas is included, and therefore if you deny a claim has to do with Knas, you say, I don't know testimony about a man who raped a girl, right? Then you're going to be liable. But according to Rabbi Akiva, you're not, because Me'ila comes to limit and limits the Knas. And that's the second possible answer. So what we did was we kind of moved Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva much more similar to each other. Akiva still has this Me'ila, but it's based on, in order to get to how we limit money and not anything else, he must be basing himself also on the drasha of the O's. And then we just had to say, what's the case where Rabbi Akiva is going to exempt and Rabbi Eliezer will obligate, and we had two possibilities. Now we're moving to Rabbi Yossi HaGlili. V'hu eid, o ra'a o yada. Okay, this I didn't go over before, we're going to go over it now. And then we said the only way you could have that is in a monetary case. What are the cases? Let's go through again. So we're having a debate. I claim I gave you money as a loan. You say it wasn't a loan. You basically claim I didn't give you money at all. And then I say, you said, I never got money from you in any sort of context. Forget about not a loan. You never gave me money. And then I say, I have witnesses that saw me give you money. Now you claimed I didn't give you money ever in any way. And then I bring witnesses that saw me give you money. Now, they didn't see what the nature of it was. They were outside the window or something. They watched the thing happen, but they didn't know, was I giving you a loan? Was I returning you your own money? They have no idea. But since you claim you never got any money from me, basically, if I bring witnesses that saw, but they don't know, they don't really know what transpired, they just saw the money be passed, I can bring those in a monetary case and then prove that you're lying because you claim never happened. We'll see some cases like that later also. What's Yediah B'lo Riyah? They know that there was a loan. How did they know? But they didn't see it. So how would they know? You come and you admit to me, I did take a loan out from you and I still owe you money. Let's say a month ago you say this, and the loan was 2 months ago. Now, the agent were there a month ago and they see that, and then they come a month later, they say, hey, we saw you admit to me that you owe me money. That's Riyah. Yidi'ah. They know there was a loan because they heard you say it, but they didn't see it. They didn't see the loan take place 2 months ago. They weren't there. So those cases can only happen in monetary cases. Well, maybe not. Okay, let's see. Amalei Rav Papa Labai. Lema Rabbi Yossi Aglili lately to Rabbi Acha. Is it possible? Are you going to say that Rabbi Yossi Aglili doesn't agree with what Rabbi Acha says? Titania. Rabbi Acha Omer. Gamal ha'ocher ben ha'gmalim. Camel is in its mating time. V'nimtza gamal harug b'tzido. Okay, so we have this camel that's in heat, where they often get very violent. And then you see this, okay, there's only one camel there with this other camel, the two camels, and then one is dead. Okay, this is what we call circumstantial evidence, right? The whole thing we're talking about is circumstantial evidence. Okay, now the gamal, they see the gamal. Okay, they didn't see the action that happened. That's the whole thing. They didn't see the action, but they see the result of the action. And there's no other camel around. There's no other anyone around. So it's obvious that the camel killed the other camel. Biyadua shezeh harago. And comes Rabbi Acha and says, circumstantial evidence, we can assume that camel killed the other camel. Now, di itle to Rabbi Acha. Now, for Biyossi Aglili held by Rabbi Acha, b'dinei nefesho nami mishkachala. You could also have a case where it's not just in Dine Mamonot. You could have circumstantial evidence in a murder case, and you could actually make someone liable, according to Rabbi Acha, because if he's going to assume, based on circumstantial evidence, that this camel killed another camel, he would do the same thing with humans, presumably. And then this whole theory that you can't find a case only in Dine Mamonot wouldn't apply according to Rabbi Acha, so it must be that Rabbi Yossi Aglili didn't hold by Rabbi Acha. That's kind of their question, like, do we have to assume he didn't hold like Rabbi Acha? Okay, it's making an assumption, but then it becomes a question. What, he can't possibly hold like him because he claims there is no such case, and then we'll see if the Gemara is going to answer. But now, how will we have a case of this Rabbi Acha in the Dinei Nefashot? And now we bring a situation that actually happened with Shimon ben Shatach. We learned this before. Okay, where did we learn it? It was in Sanhedrin. Titania, okay, Mishkach lak Rabbi Shimon ben Shatach. It's going to be like this case that happened with Shimon ben Shatach, who actually didn't obligate, but they're assuming that Rabbi Acha would have obligated. Okay, Titania. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Shatach. Okay, which means I will, really what it means is I will not see in the rebuilding of the temple, meaning I won't be zochet to see when it happens. Im lo ra'iti, meaning I swear I saw this. And I swear I saw the following thing happen. Okay, and now he's going to tell a story. And he's just using this language of, if it's not true and I'm lying, then I won't benefit from the rebuilding, being part of the nechama when the temple is rebuilt. What did he claim he saw? What's he swearing about? One guy was chasing another guy into an abandoned, right, place that used to be something is now destroyed. And I chased him. As I saw someone chasing someone else to a churba, and I ran after them. And Matsati, by the time I got there, though it was too late, Matsati Saif Biado, I found a sword in his hand. Dam B'Taptev, blood was dripping from the sword. Harug B'Farper, the dead body was, the person who was killed was convulsing. Amarti lo Rasha, mi aragolazeh. I said, you Rasha, who killed this person? Right? It's now just the two of us here. Ani or Ata. It's either me or you. And I know it wasn't me. Havamaya said, but what am I going to do? She'ein damcha mesur b'yadi. I can't kill you based on this. Because only based on 2 or 3 witnesses can the dead be killed. Can the murderers be killed? This is what the pasuk in the Torah says. But God will punish you for what you did. The story goes that they didn't move from there. Okay, a snake bit him and he died. Okay, but the point is that if Rabbi Acha says by the Gamal, we accept circumstantial evidence, the assumption is we would accept it also in a murder case. And then the whole question is, sounds like Rabbi Yosef Gli wouldn't agree with that, because Rabbi Yosef Gli said there's no case of Yediah below Riyah and Riyah below Yediah. And this is a case of Yediah below Riyah. He knew what happened, but he didn't see it, so he couldn't do it. But Rabbi Acha would say, oh, there's a case like that where you can obligate Yediah below Riyah also in a murder case, and that would be this case. So it sounds like Rabbi Yosef Gli doesn't hold by that because he thinks there is no case like that, to which we answer no. You could say he agrees with Rabbi Acha in the case of the Kamal, but what he would say is this. Now remember, it says, because it says o ra'a o yada, either see or no in the pasuk. That's where he gets this whole thing. It has to be where there's riyah below yediah and yediah below riyah. Now Rabbi Acha's case is which one? It's yediah, you know, but you didn't see. But there's no case of riyah below yediah, and that's where we're going to say he could agree with Rabbi Acha that you would accept circumstantial evidence, but that only gives you one of the two cases. While it's true you could find a case of circumstantial evidence, the yediah below riyah, what would be a case where you saw the murder, but you didn't know? What didn't you know? Well, let's assume what you didn't know is right. And then what we're going to say is you have to know all those things. If you don't know all those things, you're not witnesses. Okay, you can't be witnesses in a murder case. Milo bai meida im goy harag o Israel harag im adam trepa harag o shalem harag. When you kill someone, the witnesses have to say, we saw the murder happen. And in order to get you the death penalty, it has to be that you killed a Jew and not a Gentile. Has to be you killed a person who was healthy and not a person who was going to die within a few months, had some disease. And if the witnesses don't know that, that would be Riyah. They saw the murder, but they don't know the details of the case. They don't know who the murderer, who the person murdered was. They don't know was the person healthy or not. They don't know was the person Jewish or not. Well, then that doesn't help. You can't convict the person based on that. So that is a case that couldn't, in other words, even though you could have Yediah below Riyah in a non-monetary case, you can't have Riyah below Yediah. It doesn't exist. Now the Gemara is going to go off on a bit of a tangent and say, based on this, Shmani na kasava Rabbi Yossi Aglili. We're now going to say, or we had the whole question yesterday, mashbia, I think it was yesterday, mashbia ede knas, right? You have a case where someone was supposed to testify in, let's say, a rape case, and they said, oh, I don't know any testimony. Are you going to be liable or not? Is it just mammon? Does the mammon include knas? So it must be that Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who says that it has to have riyah without, right? It has to have riyah. It has to be that it would apply even in a case where it's only in a case where there could be riyah below yediah below riyah. Must be, he says, must be a knas patur, because a day knas, we're also not going to have a case of riyah below yediah. Okay, what does that mean? If you were going to say things chayav, it wouldn't fit into his category. His category says, right, you could have a case of circumstantial evidence by rape. That's definitely possible. But if you don't know the details of the case, you know this, you saw this person rape a woman, but you don't know, is she Jewish or not Jewish? Was she a virgin, not a virgin? If you don't know if she was a virgin, the whole thing of rape in the Torah, okay, forget about the fact that rape is a problem no matter what. But the rape described in the Torah is when they rape a woman who was a virgin. So, right, that knas is for her father because she lost her virginity. Okay, a whole other topic in and of itself, but not for today. But if you don't know that, that's the riyah, you won't be liable. So you can't have a case there. So he must say, if he holds this is the reason why only in monetary cases, it would then exclude also knas cases because it can't, you have to have that criteria where the testimony would actually be accepted. And that is only monetary cases and it wouldn't apply to knas cases. Okay, so that's a tangent off of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. And now we're going to go off a little bit more about circumstantial evidence. Very interesting topic. Yativ Rav Hamnuna Kamed Rav Yehuda, Yativ Rav Yehuda Kamed Bayale. Okay, apropos the event that happened last night with the book launch of Rabbeinu Lau that I wrote the intro to of Chachamim Volume 6, a very, very recommended reading. I was thinking as I was preparing this yesterday before I spoke, I was thinking about all the similarities here, the importance of understanding who studied by who and the relationships between them. Like here's a great sugya both here, and we're going to go further on about how students often challenge their rabbis, and the rabbis often were accepting of that. Okay, so we're going to have two nice cases of that. Yatav Rav Hamnuna Kamed Rav Yehuda. So Rav Hamnuna is the student sitting in front of Rav Yehuda. The Yatav Rav Yehuda become a baile. Rav Yehuda asks the question. If I was basically giving you money, okay, I say, I gave you money in front of these witnesses. Now, you didn't see these witnesses because turning out I'm a bet. In other words, I gave you money the other day, I claim, and there are Edim who saw it happening outside. My, what's the case? Now, notice he's missing some details, like what do you claim? Okay. In other words, the idea is can we accept those witnesses to basically prove my case? So comes Rav Hamnuna and responds and says, I don't even understand your question. Amarle Rav Hamnuna, v'hala matoem, but what are you claiming? And then what's the other side claiming, right? So when I say I gave you money, what's the other side saying back? What are you saying? E Amar, now basically what Rav Hamnuna is going to say is either which way, whatever you respond, the answers are very clear. I don't even know why you're asking the question, Rav Yehuda, because if you say you never gave me money in the, let's say I was saying I was in the room and in this room and witnesses were outside, they saw through the window me giving you money, and you say you never gave me money. Okay, this is like we talked about before. Huchsa kafan, for sure. Okay, this is the not circumstantial evidence. Sorry, this is the opposite. This is the case of riyah below yediyah, right? They saw, but they don't know. Okay, so actually it is circumstantial evidence. It's just you wouldn't necessarily, yeah, this is circumstantial evidence, but it's used differently. It's not the same as in the murder case, right? The blood is there, everything's there, it's obvious you did it. This is just you're denying the witnesses, right? You're saying they didn't see what they saw, and you're going against two witnesses. So you're huchzak kafan. You're obviously a liar now, which means you're going to have to pay the money because you denied me ever giving you money, and the witnesses saw that you did. So the witnesses are basically proving you're a liar, which means also you won't be believed later. Like you want to take an oath, your oaths are not valid anymore because you're not a trustworthy person. Iyamar in shikli vididi shkale. If you say, listen, you're right, I did get money from you the other day, but it was my money. You were returning me my money, you'd say. Now, then the witnesses are totally irrelevant because you're not denying what the witnesses saw. You're agreeing with the witnesses saw. Kiatu edim I have it. What did the edim do? All they did is they saw the money being transferred and you agree that the money was transferred. You just claim the money was yours. Since they don't know, they can't obligate you to pay. Amalei Hamnuna at Ulta. So he says to him, Hamnuna, wow, you should come into the Beit Midrash. Come. Okay, now whether Rav Hamnuna wasn't in the Beit Midrash before, I don't know, or maybe it was just a way of saying, wow, I'm impressed with you. Come learn with me. Okay, next story. Hauda Amar Lechavre. Okay, very similar. Mana maniti lach b'tzad amud. Okay, so again, I say to you, listen, I gave you money right next to this beam, this pillar. Amarle lo avarti b'tzad amud, and you say, I know what you're talking about. I didn't pass by that amud. I wasn't there. This is a funny one. Two witnesses came. Maybe I shouldn't say this is you, but and say you urinated right by that pole. Okay, so two people saw you, unfortunately, while you were urinating and said, I know you went by that pole. Now, you said I never went by the pole. So the question is, are you lying? Because we have witnesses that you went by the pole. Now, what's the issue? Well, the witnesses said you went by the pole to urinate, not to get the money. It's not like they saw the money being transferred. So Amarish Lakish, look, you said you didn't go by the pillar. So you didn't go by the pillar, and we have witnesses that said you did. You obviously lied. Rav Nachman says, what are you talking about? Haidina Parsa You're ruling like the dean of the Persians. The Persians make these rules. Oh, it's very clear cut. Oh, you said this. You proof that you did. You lied. But Mika Amar Me'olam, Be'esek Zeka Amarle. You were just saying I didn't pass by that pillar in terms of what you were saying, and you gave me money there. I wasn't talking about did I urinate there or not. That wasn't what I was referring to. So basically, Rish Lakish wants to say you're a liar, and Rav Nachman says, no, you're not. Now, and notice Rav Nachman said, it's not like you said, I've never gone past that pillar. You were just saying, I didn't go past that pillar, meaning what you meant was, since you just said simply, I didn't go past the pillar, what you meant was, I didn't go past the pillar and get money from you. But Ika de Amre, some people say the version was a little different. Who de Amre lechavrim? Okay, same thing. I was giving you money next to this pillar. Amar lo avarti b'tzad me'olam, and you said, I never, notice the word me'olam. This time they said, I never went past that beam. And just like Rav Nachman said before, because you didn't say I never did, we're not going to make you liable. In this case, you said I never did. Comes Rav Nachman and says, right, nafku beisade de mayim b'tzad. Two witnesses came and said, you urinated by the pillar. Rav Nachman uchzak kafran. And Rav Nachman came and says, you're a liar. Amar le Rava le Rav Nachman. This time Rava, the student of Rav Nachman, says to Rav Nachman, what kind of a ruling is that? Kol milta to lo ramya le de inish avela velavadate. And comes Rav Nachman, who has the last word in the story. I'm sorry, Rava, and says to Rav Nachman, and we've seen this before in different words, but kol mile dichtilo dechirei nashe, right? Things that aren't significant, people don't remember. Right? The fact that I urinated next to this pole, I'm going to remember what pole I urinated by? Come on, I'm not going to remember that. So when I said I didn't go by that pole ever, I didn't remember that. Okay, I was kind of saying I didn't do anything significant there that I recall. Okay, and therefore, when the witnesses come, I'm not going to be considered a liar because I said that. Okay, so we have two different versions of the story. And these are all cases we got off on this tangent because of what Rabbi Yossi HaGlili said about Ri'iyah B'lo Yediah. These are all cases where somebody saw something, but they don't really know what transpired. And the question is, could it be used in this case, right? There are cases where clearly it could be used, but in these cases, it's not so clear it can be used as incriminating evidence or not, incriminating testimony. Okay, now we get to Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Chiev Kam Chiev B'Pikadon. Okay, and we have this long thing of Rabbi Shimon. Again, let's bring up the study guide. And in this section, Rabbi Shimon says, if you remember, a few things. Rabbi Shimon says first, sorry, I'm going to go up. Rabbi Shimon says the bottom of the first side, right? Chiev kan, chiev b'pikadon, just like in pikadon it's mammon, also here it's mammon, and there's a kal v'chomer because pikadon is more far-reaching, to which he then rejects and says, no, it's actually not. He rejects his own kal v'chomer and he says, no, because actually pikadon is limited in two ways. The mushba is not kinishba, it's only mipi atzmo, not mipi acherim. If other people made you take the oath and you just said yes, it doesn't count. You're not liable. And mezik kishogeg, it's not in a case of intentional, it's only shgaga. It's only if it was accidental. And edut, both those things are not the case. Mushba is kinishba and mezid is kishogeg. You're liable for mezid and you're liable for mipi achim. And therefore, in the end, he says, therefore, I'll learn it from this gzeira shava, techta, techta. Now we're going to say, they mocked him in Ma'arav and Eretz Yisrael. They said, that's a ridiculous statement you made. And now we're going to have a long argument to try to figure out what is this chocha. My chocha. What were they mocking him about? So now let's go to the sentence we didn't understand and claim, right? Okay, what we're going to do is you can see from the first two, and I underline them. The first, we're going to say the whole mushba kinishba doesn't make sense. And then we're going to say, well, after we reject that, we're going to say the mezik shogeg doesn't make any sense. Okay, so two parts of that same sentence, but it's obviously going to be connected to that statement right now. So the first two are connected to that statement. So my chocha, dikatani, right? What's interesting here is you have a long statement of Rabbi Shimon, and then you see they mocked him, and we have no idea which part they mocked him about. Dikatani, mala pikadon shken lo asaba mushba kinishba mezi kishogeg. So now we're going to say pikadon is not in a case of mushba b'pi acherim, if other people made you take the oath, and not in intention. So what did they laugh at? Well, michti mushba mipi atzmo be'edut l'Rabbi Shimon menale, degamar mipi kadon. How did we get, right? What they're saying is, he's assuming that mushba is kinishba, and nishba is kimushba, in shvuat edut. Now remember, shvuat edut is only mushba. How we learn nishba also, if I take the oath on my own, they learned it from pikadon. Well, pikadon nami, mushba mipi acherim, nigmar me'edut. How'd they learn it from pikadon? Remember the sugya? We said, oh, this was on, I think, Lamed Aleph. Pikadon is, right, has the same word as edut. We're going to learn from pikadon to edut that pikadon is, I took the oath myself. Edut also, I took the oath myself. And likewise, we're going to learn, since edut is, I was mushba mipi acherim, pikadon is also mushba mipi acherim. So it should be the same and not different. And maybe that's what they mocked him for. To which the Gemara answers, no. Umay chocha. Dilma Rabbi Shimon b'kavachomer ma'itela mipi acherim chayav mipi atzmo lo koshkin. If you remember in the sugya there, we saw that somebody said this, that maybe it's not Gzeira Shava. Maybe it's learned out the fact that Shvuat HaEdut is even if I do Mushban B'Pi Atzmi and not just Mushban B'Pi Acherim, that other people make me take the oath, it's just a simple Kavachomer. If I'm liable because someone else made me swear and I didn't even take the oath myself and I just said, yeah, I don't know any testimony, well, then obviously I'm going to be liable if I take the oath myself. But that wouldn't work in the other direction for Pikadon. So maybe that's the way he has it. So that's not actually difficult. Maybe he really believes that Shvuat Pikadon is only the way it appears simply in the Pasuk, only Mushba Mipi Atzmo and not Mipi Achim. And that's possible. So that's not so difficult. So let's try attempt number 2. Elachucha mezi kishogeg. Right? Where we get this thing, there's only shogeg, not mezi. Shwar pikadon. Tikatanim ala pikadon shken lo asaba mushpa kenishpa mezi kishogeg. And that's the line that's a problem because the mezi kishogeg part. Michti mezi, but here it doesn't make sense either, right? Michti mezi gabe edu minale delo ktiv be v'ne'elam. Right? Why is edut? Why do we get that edut is intentional? Because it doesn't say the word v'ne'elam. It doesn't say and you forgot, like all the other cases nearby. Hachanami lo ktiv be v'ne'elam. But pikadon it also doesn't say and you forgot. So where would you even get that it's only shogeg, okay? And it's not mazid. In other words, you would say since it doesn't say shogeg, it must be also mazid. So Amar Lahu Rapuna Umay Chocha. Okay, so that was the Chocha. They're saying it doesn't make any sense to say it's only shogeg. Okay, these are the two questions we didn't understand, right? Where did he get this from? And that's what they're laughing at. Okay, that's what they think. However, so what do you mean? It's very clear why it's only shogeg and not mezi by pikadon. Amar Lahu Rapuna Umay Chocha. Dilma mezi dilav keshogeg b'pikadon mimi'ila Rabbi Shimon Gamarla. Should be really Rabbi Shimon Gamar Meila. It would make a little more sense to read it like that, but it means the same thing. Maybe we learn the laws of Pikadon from Meila. What's Meila? Misuse of consecrated property. Now, what would be the connection between Pikadon and Meila? Well, first of all, both are taking something that's not yours and using it. Both you have a Korban Asham. There's Asham Meilo and an Asham Gzelo. That's the same. Okay, that's for the Asham Gzelo is for the Pikadon case where you steal something of someone's claim it's your own. And it says in the Pasuk, this is the most real reason. It says, Nefesh ki tachta uma'ala mal b'Hashem v'chichesh b'mito b'pikadon u'b'tzumet yad o b'gezel o shaket amito. The words use the words me'ila in the pasuk, which means it's referencing me'ila. Now, what's me'ila? Misuse of consecrated property, and it only applies for a shogeg case. So maybe we'll say, we learn it from me'ila. The me'ila is b'shogeg. So even though it doesn't say v'ne'elam, from the fact it says me'ila ma'al mal b'Hashem, we're going to say, this is like me'ila, it's only shogeg. However, now they're going to say, V'hainu chocha. Okay, option 3. Okay, so now they're going to say option 3 is maybe that's the chocha. Okay, so they're going to say basically, you can't mock him that shogeg is not like mazid in a pikadon case, so you're not obligated mazid because maybe it's learned from Ela. And I say, if that's the way you're going to read this source, that's the tzchok. Why? Okay, now we're going to go back to what we had before, this type of, in the earlier sugya, of which one is it more similar to? So now they're going to say, why would you learn it from Eli? You could learn it from Edut. Mistabra, so they're going to say, well, no, it's actually not such a mockery to learn it from Eli, not from Edut, because, and again, if you learn it from Eli, you're going to say only shogeg. If you're going to learn it from the oath of testimony, that's even mazid. But they're going to say, Mistabra mi me'ila havalil me'elaf, shekem me'ila mi me'ila. Because it says me'ila in the pasuk, so let's learn it from me'ila. They say, what do you mean? Adrabah, right? If you had to think about it, what's it more similar to? Oath of pikadon, oath of deposit to oath of testimony, or oath of deposit to misuse of consecrated property. Right? What's the connection? And look, there's Gzera Shava. Remember, we did Gzera Shava from pikadon to edut, both saying nefesh ki techta, nefesh ki techta. Right? So it says sin. Me'ila doesn't say the word sin. More logical to learn it from edut, and then that would be the problem. Right? Why are you learning it from Me'ila? And to then say that it's not chayav and mazid. So they say no. Mistabra mi Me'ila havalil me'elaf, and here we go with our list. How similar is it to Me'ila? Bakol, it applies to everybody. It's supposed to shvua to edut, not relatives, not women, not all those. But Me'ila is everybody, and shvua to pikadon is anybody. Neheneh, both are cases where you're benefiting from property that somebody else's. Okay, pikadon and me'ila, consecrated property. Bikavua, they both have a set sacrifice. Asham, you can't change it if you're poor to something else, as opposed to, right, the korban olav yoreh by oath of testimony. An oath of testimony, you're not benefiting by, obviously. Chomesh v'asham, and they both have a korban asham, a guilt offering, and they both have to add a fifth to them, the pikadon and the me'ila. You misuse consecrated property, you use someone's pikadon and claim it's your own, you have to pay back the item and an additional fifth. So it's very similar to me'ila, and that would be logical to learn from there. And then that's not why they laughed in Eretz Yisrael, because it's obvious. And that's how Rabbi Shimon got to the fact that there's no mazid. So again, the Gemara is going to say, Adrabah, me'edut havalil me'ela, shekain chata hedyot b'shvuah. Okay, first of all, both say sin. Both have to do with hedyot, not sanctified items. Me'ila is the world of kodshim. These are everyday stuff. Bishvua, and they're both oaths. Forget about anything. They're both the same topic. They're oaths. And Tave v'kafre, they both have someone said, you owe me something back, you owe me testimony, and the person denied it, and owing. And they also have the word owe in them, which there's no O in Me'ila. But Hanach Nefishin, still there's more. If we do a numbers game, there's more similarities to Me'ila than there is to Edut, and therefore this isn't a problem. So now we're going to say that Rabbi Shimon basically learned Mazid. Doesn't apply to a Mazid case Pikadon because he learned Pikadon from Me'ila, and the Jews in Israel, the rabbis in Israel weren't laughing at that because that actually makes sense. Okay, so we're still up to my chocha. Why were they laughing? Ki ata Rav Papa. We're up to option 4, I believe. Yeah, 4. Ata Rav Papa v'Rapuna Breit Rav Yoshua mi Bei Rav Amri. Hainu chocha. Michti Rabbi Shimon Gzera Shava Gamar. Lama le deparich mal pikadon shken lo asaba mushpa kenishba mezi kishogeg. This is a very good question. If he learns the Gzera Shava, then what do you learn from the Gzera Shava? Whatever's true for Pikadon is true for Edut. In the end, that's what he learns, the Gzera Shava, right? And therefore, whatever's true for Edut should be true for Pikadon as well. So you can't say there's a difference between them, that Pikadon is not Mushba Kanishba and not Mezi Kishogeg. He does learn the Gzera Shava. Remember we said maybe he has the Kavach Homer? He doesn't have the Kavach Homer in the end because he learns, right? That's how he learns he learns from Pikadon to Edut from Kavach from Gzera Shava. Whatever's true for one is true for the other. So you can't say there's differences. There aren't. They must be the same based on the Gzera Shava. So I say, nah, that's not necessarily a problem. Why not? My chocha, Dilma Kiparach, Mekami to take him like Gzera Shava. Remember, he says the Gzera Shava at the end. So when he knocked out the Kavach Homer, he hadn't yet had the Gzera Shava. Only when he has the Gzera Shava later is he going to compare everything, and then he's going to change what he thinks. In other words, in the end, we're going to say maybe Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold. Mazid is not Kishogeg and Mushba is not Kinishba, but he actually is, once he has the Gzera Shava, everything's going to be the same as Shvuah Edut, and they're going to be identical. Well, that's going to be a problem. Why? Below. V'hamar le Rabba Bari Tyler Rabbanan. Mantana de Shvuah Pikadon Lo Nitans Nona Kapara Rabbi Shimon. Basically, he says the author of, the person who says, okay, because it's a unique opinion, that Shvuah Pikadon is not for Mazid is Rabbi Shimon. So you can't say after the Gzera Shava he changed his position. And this line that we had in the third section of Divrei Rabbi Shimon, before the fourth section of the Gzera Shava, was before the Gzera Shava, and he changed his mind after that. So we know he didn't change his mind because they basically say when it comes to Mezi Kishogeg, he certainly didn't change his mind. He's the only one who holds that there is no Korban Pikadon, an Asham for a Pikadon case if you're Mazid. So they say, okay. Dilma Mezi Kishogeg Parach de Gamalami Meila Dehanach Nefishin. So fine. Maybe in the end, Rabbi Shimon, he has the Gzera Shava, but what? When it comes to Mezi Kishogeg, that he learns from Meila. Okay? That's the one thing he takes from Meila, even though the rest he learns from Gzera Shava. But Avamushba Kinishba lo Parach. But maybe Mushba Kinishba he didn't. In other words, in the end, Mushba Kinishba, you could say, he really held this before he had the Gzera Shava. Once he has the Gzera Shava, he does compare them for everything, just not for the Shogeg Mezid thing. And then again, there's no chocha. It makes perfect sense. So we're going to stop here. We have one more we're going to deal with tomorrow. We'll stop here for now. And that's our sugya. So what did we do today? We took the 4 opinions of how do we know that Edut is only mammon, because it definitely doesn't say that in the Torah. We have 4 attempts to try to prove it, right? 4 actual answers, each one different. And then we went into them and asked difficulties on each one and tried to figure out what's difficult. But the last one was kind of funny because they mocked him and we actually didn't know what was difficult. As we tried to say, and every time we said what was difficult, we actually said it's not so difficult. So we don't really know why they mocked him in Israel about it. And any question we did raise, we actually resolved. And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day.